The old man hit the concrete hard, his hands trembling as he tried to shield himself, not from fists, but from the laughter echoing above him. 5 bikers circled, amused, satisfied, as if shoving an 80-year-old veteran was some kind of sport. Around them, no one stepped in. A mother pulled her child away. A cashier peeked out, then looked back at her phone. Even the teenager filming didn't flinch. But the man they mocked, Thomas Delroy, didn't curse, didn't shout. He simply stood, blood dripping from his temple, and drove away. Quiet. Steady. Unbroken. What they couldn't see was the number he dialed. What they didn't hear were the 3 words that mobilized something far greater than revenge. Because 1 hour later, 5 black SUVs would cut through that same silence, surrounding a public park with retired soldiers who hadn't forgotten the meaning of loyalty. And as one by one, hats were removed, heads were bowed, and the laughter stopped cold. The town remembered who he was. If you believe dignity never grows old, stay with this story. Type honor to stand with those who still stand tall. And if your heart still answers when duty calls, this space was made for you. Thomas Delroy was 80 years old, though his spine still held the memory of a man who used to stand 6 feet tall without effort. His shoulders had dipped with time, and the faded green cap that bore the insignia of the Special Forces sat low over a forehead, now carved with lines from years that never apologized for passing. His eyes, sharp and clear as rifle glass, still scanned the world like every movement mattered, because once it had. His hands, weathered and slow, trembled slightly now as he lifted his coffee every morning at 6:15, seated alone on the front porch of his weather-beaten house. A ritual so precise, it might as well have been military roll call. He never missed a day, no matter the weather, no matter the pain in his hip from the shrapnel embedded during an operation in Laos 1971, an ambush where he carried a wounded teammate for miles through jungle heat so thick it suffocated. He lived alone now. His wife passed 5 years earlier, and their son, killed in a highway accident 2 years after returning from deployment, left behind a silence too loud to speak over. Tom didn't have visitors. The neighbors waved, sometimes. Most just walked past. Kids at the corner store never held the door. Even the gas station near his house had stopped offering the veterans discount, unless he reminded them. And even then, the young cashier would barely glance up, eyes tethered to her glowing screen. But Tom never complained. That wasn't his way. He'd fought too many battles to waste breath on ones that didn't matter. The world had moved on. He hadn't. His world remained measured, disciplined, folded clothes, sharpened tools, a truck older than most drivers, but kept running by his own hand. And that morning, as he pulled into the gas station under the July sun that made the asphalt shimmer like water, there was something different in the air. Not the heat, but the weight of eyes watching too closely. 5 young men leaning against chrome motorcycles, eyes tracking him not with curiosity, but with that restless smirk of boys looking for something to break. Tom stepped out, slowly, careful not to lock his bad knee, and adjusted his cap as he had 1,000 times before. He didn't speak. He didn't look their way. But one of them chuckled, low, deliberate, and said, "Bet the truck belongs in a museum." Tom's fingers didn't flinch, but deep in his gut, something shifted. Not fear. Something older. Something colder. Something that knew exactly what came next. The sun beat down hard as Tom stepped out of his truck, the smell of hot asphalt mixing with gasoline, and the faint scent of worn leather drifting from the line of motorcycles to his right. He moved slowly, each step a calculation, his left knee grinding like rusted gears. But he didn't limp. He never gave them the satisfaction. The bikers watched, arms crossed, eyes glittering beneath sunglasses and bravado, the kind of young men who had never earned a scar but wore skull tattoos like medals. One of them, broad, smirking, called out without even pretending to whisper, "Check out Grandpa's rust bucket. Probably stole it from a museum." Laughter followed, sharp and careless. Tom said nothing. He just opened the fuel cap, pulled the hose, and focused on the rhythm. Click, squeeze, hold. Simple. Mechanical. Dodge. Safe. Safe. That was when the first one approached. The scent of cheap cologne and menthol hit before the voice did. "That thing even pass inspection?" the biker said, dragging a finger across the dented fender like he owned it. "Looks like it should have been crushed 20 years ago." Tom glanced up, meeting the younger man's gaze with eyes that had once seen through jungle smoke and enemy crosshairs. "Still runs," he said flatly, returning to the pump. That answer, calm and dismissive, was enough to set the fire. The others followed, boots thudding against concrete, forming a loose half-circle that cut off every exit except the one behind him. "This ain't a retirement home, old man," another said, crowding closer. Tom didn't move, didn't argue. "Just getting gas," he murmured, his voice low, unwavering. "No trouble." But trouble came anyway. One biker stepped forward and knocked the red gas canister from his hand. It hit the pavement with a hollow clang, fuel splashing across the concrete like a scar. Tom bent down. Too slow, too deliberate, and just as his fingers touched the handle, the first biker shoved him. It wasn't a hard shove. It didn't have to be. Just cruel enough. Just sharp enough. Tom hit the ground with a thud that silenced nothing. His palm scraped open. His hip screamed. His head bounced once, lightly, and a thin trickle of blood slid down the side of his face. The laughter returned, coarser now, triumphant. "Can't even take a little push." Someone chuckled. A woman across the lot rushed her child into their SUV, never looking back. The cashier stared, blinked, and vanished behind tinted glass. A teenage boy held up his phone, recording, steadily, professionally, but didn't lift a finger. Tom lay there, not because he couldn't rise, but because he was remembering. Not the pain, he'd known worse. Not the embarrassment, he no longer cared, but the silence of a country he once bled for, where people now watched but didn't stand. Then, slowly, he moved. He pushed off the concrete with both hands, refusing to wince. He didn't wipe the blood. He didn't speak. He stood, straightened his spine as far as it would go, and turned back toward his truck. The biker stepped aside, mockingly polite, smirking as he passed. They didn't notice the pause before he opened the door. They didn't see him glance at the passenger side glove box. They didn't know that inside, wrapped in oilcloth, sat a number he hadn't dialed in over 40 years. Not yet. Not now. But something in his eyes had changed. And when the engine roared to life and he pulled away, no horn, no words, no glare back. It wasn't retreat. It was permission. 48 minutes after Thomas Delroy pulled away from the gas station, the first black SUV rolled quietly into the town's Central Park. No siren, no lights, just the soft growl of a well-maintained engine and government plates dulled by time. It parked without urgency beneath a grove of oaks, followed 2 minutes later by a second, then a third, then two more, each arriving from a different angle, strategic, deliberate, forming a loose but inescapable perimeter around the park's open field. No announcement, no uniformed officers, just an unsettling silence that spread like frost through the summer air. Parents looked up from their benches. Children froze mid-play. Conversations faltered and dissolved. When the doors opened, simultaneously, like a drill remembered too well, 5 men stepped out, each in plain black t-shirts, each bearing an insignia faint but unmistakable to those who knew. They weren't young, but they didn't move like old men. Their steps were firm, shoulders square, heads high. No wasted motion. No uncertainty. These were not weekend warriors. These were men who had once lived on the edge of maps and in the margins of history. Leading them was Colonel James Harrington, 75 years old, retired 20 years. But the steel in his frame hadn't rusted. And the calm in his eyes was the kind that only came from walking through fire and returning with every step memorized. He walked without hesitation, his boots sinking slightly into the grass, hands loose at his sides, as if he were stepping back into a role that had never truly let him go. His jaw was set, his gaze unwavering. He didn't scan. He already knew where to go. On a wooden bench beneath the wide arms of a sycamore, Thomas Delroy sat waiting. Blood had dried at his temple. His hands rested on his knees. He didn't stand when Harrington approached. He didn't smile. But something in his posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, like tension exhaling after holding its breath too long. Harrington came to a stop, looked down at the man who had once pulled him from a burning LZ in 71, and dropped to one knee. Not as a gesture of sympathy, but of allegiance. "Sergeant Major Delroy," he said, voice low but firm, the kind that quiets rooms and steadies men. "Whiskey team reporting, as requested." Thomas blinked once, slow. "You didn't all have to come," he murmured. A voice from behind answered, "All of us, or none of us." David Reeves, former Master Sergeant. His frame still solid as steel piping. No grin, no banter, just present. Behind him, Michael Jenkins removed his cap and dog tags. Thomas Wilson, the old medic, crouched beside the bench, inspecting the dried blood like it was a field triage. None of them asked questions. None of them needed to. Near the playground, the 5 bikers, who had spent the last half hour revving engines and tossing beer cans near trash bins, now stood still. Their laughter had died without warning. One leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. The other straightened like something unseen had pressed against their chests. Then came the question, "Who did this?" Wilson asked, softly but clearly. Thomas didn't point, didn't speak. He simply looked. One long, quiet glance toward the cluster of bikes, and that was enough. No names needed, no introductions offered. Everyone in that park suddenly understood what came next. Under the weight of a silence that no one dared break, Colonel Harrington turned fully to face the row of leather-clad figures standing beside their bikes. His eyes moved slowly across each of them, measuring, not menacing, like a teacher waiting for someone to confess. The lead biker, taller than the others and still holding a half-crushed energy drink, gave a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What is this, a retirement parade?" he said, laughing thinly. "You guys here to reminisce about the good old days?" No one responded. The team behind Harrington didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe louder than they had to. The crowd stayed exactly where they were, mothers clutching children's hands tighter, the teenager still holding his phone, but not recording anymore. The park had become a stage, and only 2 sides had speaking lines. The biker tried again, louder this time, shrugging off the weight in the air. He tripped. "All right? Old man probably forgot how gravity works. You can't just show up here trying to act like..." His words stopped, because Harrington had stepped aside, and Michael Jenkins took his place. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, arms relaxed, tags around his neck, clinking softly as they settled on his chest. Then, from beneath his shirt, he pulled the small silver emblem, the one the public rarely saw up close, the Medal of Honor. It caught the sun like it was made for it. He held it up, and his voice, when it came, was clear as glass, breaking in church. In 1971, Sergeant Major Thomas Delroy led a classified extraction in Laos, Jenkins said. 14 American PLBUs, 30-plus enemy combatants, 3 bullet wounds, no man left behind. He was the last to board the helicopter. Then, after a beat, softer, "I was one of the men he carried." The biker blinked. "He's lying," one of the others muttered, but no one believed it. Not anymore. Not with every phone now lifted, every witness wide-eyed, every heartbeat waiting for the floor to drop. Harrington didn't have to say a word. The moment had spoken for itself. And then, as if to sign the silence, another man stepped forward, a uniformed officer, younger, ceremonial. He carried a polished wooden box. Without ceremony, without preamble, he opened it. Inside lay a second Medal of Honor. "Your original was stolen from your home in 1989, he said, addressing Thomas directly. "The Department of Defense authorized a replacement. We've been trying to find you." A ripple passed through the park, like wind through wheat. The leader of the bikers didn't speak now. His fingers flexed once around the can in his hand, then loosened. His jaw shifted. His gaze dropped for just a second. No one needed to tell him what was happening. The air had changed. The weight had shifted. And for the first time all day he looked unsure. The weight of the moment pressed down like a storm about to break. But no thunder came. Only the stillness of truth, gathering force. Colonel Harrington hadn't moved since the Medal of Honor was revealed. The younger officer who held the polished wooden box stepped forward now. Not with a salute, not with ceremony, but with clarity. "This man," he said, nodding toward Thomas Delroy, "served with honor, distinction, and sacrifice most of us will never comprehend. What happened to him today wasn't just a crime. It was a disgrace." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His words didn't echo. They sank, like stone dropped in deep water. One of the bikers shifted uneasily. Another took a step back, suddenly needing distance. But it was the youngest, the one who had recorded the shove, who finally cracked. He fumbled in his pocket, eyes flickering from the officer to the crowd to the man still seated on the bench. "It wasn't all of us," he stammered. "I told them to chill. I didn't touch him." His voice died under the weight of too many eyes. Behind him, a woman, silent until now, stepped forward. A gas station clerk, barely 20, holding a printed still from the store's security feed. Grainy, time-stamped, and damning. "I saw everything," she said, voice low but steady. "I didn't say anything before. I should have." The lead biker, who had shoved Thomas, didn't speak. He stared down at his boots, chest rising fast. The smirk was gone. The bravado vanished. What replaced it was smaller, twitchier, desperate. "Dave, it was a joke," he muttered. "He didn't even fall that hard." Someone in the crowd whispered, "But he bled." Another, "He didn't fight back." And then another voice. A quiet, cracked murmur from a teenage boy near the swings. "I recorded it too. I thought it was funny." Silence again. He held up his phone like a confession. A low click broke the quiet. The young officer, expression unchanged, raised a radio to his lips. "We'll need a unit at Delroy Park. Misdemeanor assault," confirmed video. "Multiple witnesses." He didn't look at the bikers when he spoke. He looked at Thomas and nodded. 2 patrol cars rolled in moments later, silent, slow. Their lights weren't on. They didn't need to be. The officer stepped aside. The bikers didn't resist. One of them trembled. Another asked if they could call someone. The lead biker, his hands now behind his back, didn't say a word as the cuffs clicked shut. He flinched, just once, when the crowd shifted, not forward, not to jeer, but to witness. No one clapped. No one smiled. It wasn't a victory. It was justice. As he was led toward the cruiser, a boy stepped away from his mother, hesitated, then approached Thomas. His hand held something. Wild flowers, small, bruised from his grip. "My dad's a soldier," he whispered. "He says real heroes don't wear capes. They just never stop standing." Thomas didn't take the flowers. He placed a hand over the boy's, steady, grateful. And behind them, as the cruiser door shut with a dull finality, the man who had laughed now sat alone, eyes on the ground, swallowed whole by a silence he once used as a weapon. That evening, the small church on the edge of town filled like it hadn't in years. The pews groaned under the weight of people who hadn't stepped through those doors since weddings or funerals. There were no invitations, no announcements, just a quiet understanding that spread from phone to porch to sidewalk. Something had happened, and everyone needed to face it. Thomas Delroy sat in the front pew, his posture straight but humble, his hands resting lightly on his knees. The whiskey team stood behind him, not as a wall, but as a circle, unmoving, protective, reverent, tight. The mayor, usually polished and rehearsed, stumbled through his words. "For 50 years," he began, "Sergeant Major Delroy has walked among us, and we didn't know. We didn't ask. We didn't see." His voice cracked, not from drama, but from weight. In the pews, eyes dropped. Some clutched the programs too tightly. Others simply stared ahead, ashamed to glance at the man they'd overlooked at gas stations, grocery stores, sidewalks. A young woman near the back wiped her eyes. A mechanic who once turned Thomas away leaned forward, elbows on his knees, jaw clenched in guilt. And then the smallest gesture. A waitress from the diner entered late, still in uniform, carrying a paper cup. Coffee. She walked down the center aisle, slow, careful, not looking at the crowd. Reached Thomas. Set the cup gently on the bench beside him. No words, just a nod. Then she turned and walked back the way she came. Others followed. No parade, no ceremony. A teenage boy placed a folded American flag pin at the end of the pew. An old man removed his veteran's cap and laid it on the floor. A mother nudged her son to rise, and the boy, sheepish, crossed the aisle to shake Thomas's hand. No one cheered. No one clapped. But something changed. Thomas stood when it was his turn. Not quickly, not theatrically. Just stood. Looked out at the crowd, not with resentment, not with sadness, but with the quiet gravity of a man who had outlived pain and carried purpose in its place. "I didn't come here for recognition," he said, his voice low but even. "I came because I needed to remember that there was a time we stood by each other, when being silent felt like betrayal, when no one got left behind." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He just let the words settle, like dust on polished wood. Then he looked toward the back, where a window glowed amber with the last of the sun, and added, softer, "I'm not asking anyone to change the world. Just to notice it, and to notice the people who have been standing beside you all along." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the mayor took off his tie, folded it, and left it on the altar. Symbol or apology, no one knew. A police officer from earlier stepped forward, eyes lowered, and offered Thomas a folded document. It was a city proclamation. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he waited for Thomas to nod before he handed it over. Outside, the sky had turned a deep, forgiving blue. Lights flickered on across town, not for show, but because people had come home. And in the stillness that followed, as the whiskey team escorted Thomas through the doors, someone whispered just loud enough for the silence to carry it. "This place used to feel like home. Maybe it can be again." The park looked different now. Not because the trees had grown or the benches were repainted, but because something had settled into the soil, something weightless but permanent. The patch of grass where Thomas Delroy once sat bleeding beneath an open sky was now framed by a simple wooden sign, Delroy Square, in honor of those who served in silence. No marble, no spotlight, just oak and iron and memory. People passed through differently. A teenage boy who once laughed at the way Thomas walked now came every Friday with a rag and a bottle of polish, wiping dust from the bronze plaque that bore no rank, only a name. A barista from downtown started asking customers if they'd served, and if they had, the coffee came in a mug marked free. No receipt, no words exchanged. The town didn't hold a parade. They held eye contact. The gas station where it all began had changed too. Above the register hung a grainy photo of Thomas, taken decades ago, younger, uniformed, standing beside a helicopter with the wind in his face. Below it a plaque read, "Our neighbor, our protector, our reminder." A small case held his tattered veteran discount card, the one he'd tried to use the day he was shoved. None of it was officially commissioned. The frame came from the owner's garage. The photo was printed from a news clip by a middle schooler who'd done a project on what courage looked like. No one told them to do it. They just did. Thomas never commented on any of it. He still parked in the same corner spot. Still walked slow with one hand pressed lightly to his hip. Still greeted people with a nod that meant more than good morning. He didn't revisit the day. Others did it for him. Someone made a short film. A student wrote an essay that won state recognition. The teenager who once recorded the shove uploaded a new video. This one of Thomas smiling as the whiskey team helped repaint the flagpole behind the firehouse. No background music. Just brushstrokes and wind. Schools began inviting veterans for lunch talks. Not the famous ones, but the ones who shopped in their stores and folded their flags quietly. And something shifted in the way young people listened. They didn't applaud. They asked to hear more. One afternoon, as golden light filtered through the oak branches in Delroy Square, a group of sixth graders stood around the plaque, sketching it for a class project. A teacher noticed Thomas watching from across the street and asked if he wanted to come speak. He shook his head once. Then he tipped his cap and kept walking. That was enough. By the end of the month, the local library had dedicated a shelf to personal histories, letters, medals, even boots donated by families who had never known where to place them. One boy brought in his grandfather's canteen saying, "He never talked about the war, but I think he would have liked it here." And every now and then, a stranger would stop beside Thomas's truck, restored now, gleaming blue, its rust scars replaced with polish but not forgotten, and simply say, "Thank you." Not loudly. Not for anyone else to hear. At sunset, you could still find him at the same bench, beneath the same tree, watching the wind move through leaves like memories that refused to fade. He never needed a microphone. His silence had spoken loud enough. And carved into the corner of the wooden sign, barely noticeable unless you were close enough to care, was one final line in small serif type. "Honor doesn't speak. It endures." The booth in the corner was quiet. Faded leather seats, a flickering bulb above, two mugs steaming in silence. One black, one half filled with cream. Thomas Delroy sat with his hands wrapped around the ceramic, staring through the window as if the late afternoon sun might reveal something beyond reflection. Across from him, David Reeves leaned back, arms crossed, watching not the street, but the man who used to lead him through shadows. Neither had spoken for a long while. "You okay, old man?" David finally asked, voice low but steady, like a question he'd rehearsed 100 times, but only now dared ask. Thomas didn't answer right away. He shifted slightly, exhaled through his nose, then nodded once, barely. "Didn't think I'd need you again," he murmured, the weight in his tone not sorrow, but something older, worn. "What?" David reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in a cloth napkin. He unfolded it slowly and slid it across the table. Thomas didn't need to open it. He recognized the outline of the object, the moment it touched his fingertips. The dog tags he thought lost in Laos bent slightly. Blood still rusted around the edge, but cleaner now. Reverent. "You carried these?" Thomas asked. "For a while," David said. "Then I kept them. Thought you'd want them back when the time was right." Thomas nodded again. The clink of his spoon against the mug was the only sound between them. Outside, kids played in the distance, their laughter faint like echoes from a life before war. The jukebox in the far corner clicked into an old Sam Cooke song, "Bring It On Home to Me." Neither man acknowledged it, but both heard. David broke a cracker into his soup. Thomas adjusted his cap. No talk of the news, or the day, or even the chaos that brought them here. Just steam rising, memories folding inward. "You did good, Tom," David said quietly, still standing. That mattered. Thomas didn't reply. Instead, he looked down, touched the cloth napkin again, then slowly extended his hand across the table. David met it halfway. No shake, no grasp, just palm to palm. Still. A waitress passed by, refilled their waters, said nothing. She left a slice of lemon in Thomas's glass. He noticed, smiled faintly, and nodded in her direction. She nodded back and walked on. When it came time to leave, they didn't rush. David rose first, picked up his jacket, and waited. Thomas followed slowly, joints stiff, but reliable. At the door, Thomas paused, looked around the diner, at the dusty jukebox, the clock that always ran 5 minutes slow, the booth where he'd sat with his wife 40 years ago. Then he looked at David. No words. Just a look. A thank you without speaking. And they walked out together, not as soldiers, not as survivors, but as men who had lived long enough to understand that silence isn't absence. It's memory, finally at peace. Under the soft chime of the chapel bell, the story began to travel, first in whispers, then in careful recollections shared between generations. At the barbershop on Main Street, where old radios hummed and hair clippings lay scattered on checkered tiles, a customer leaned forward to ask, "You hear what happened to Frank Delroy?" The barber nodded, paused his clippers, and said, "That man, he's what people used to call solid." No need for details. The tone said it all. At Franklin Middle School, a civics teacher set down her chalk and played a grainy clip recorded from the park. No narration, no fanfare. Just the moment Frank stood up, blood dried at his temple, unflinching. The room, full of restless 12-year-olds, went still. One student quietly raised his hand and asked if he could interview a veteran for his final project. That had never happened before. Elsewhere, in a church basement filled with the scent of coffee and folding chairs, an elder read aloud from a letter written by someone who'd once laughed at Frank behind the gas station. He didn't defend his actions. He just wrote, "That day, I saw what dignity looks like," and it kept spreading. One morning, a teenage girl picked up a crumpled flag, fallen from its mount outside the town library. She stood on tiptoe, resecured the bracket, and stepped back, eyes fixed as the fabric unfurled against the rising sun. No one told her to. No one clapped. Frank Delroy never recounted the story. He never spoke of it at the diner or the post office, or to the neighborhood kids who waved as he passed. But others did. People who saw it. People who felt it. People who couldn't quite explain why their throat caught when they said his name. His son, retired Colonel Ethan Delroy, once spoke at a local veterans event. He mentioned his father briefly, just one sentence. "My dad never raised his voice, but when he stood, the world noticed." That line was printed in the local paper, clipped and pinned to 100 refrigerators. One small-town journalist called Frank the quiet standard we forgot we needed. Another simply wrote, "Some men are medals. Some men are monuments." The townspeople didn't call him a hero. They didn't throw parades. But when someone new asked, "Who's that?" and a finger pointed toward the old man refilling his truck, the answer came softly, "That's Frank," as if the name itself carried gravity. A second-grade teacher placed a photo of Frank, standing beside his truck, on her classroom wall. The caption beneath it read, "Still standing." A fourth grader lingered on that image after dismissal, his backpack sliding off one shoulder, eyes fixed. He didn't say a word. But the next day, he brought in his grandfather's service patch and asked to add it to the display. And on the steps of the town hall, just below the American flag, a smaller flag now flew. Navy blue, stitched with gold. In honor of quiet strength. It wasn't official, but no one took it down. Because stories like Frank's don't fade. They ripple. They remind. They rise. The church was full, but no one made a sound. Not when Frank stepped up. Not when the mayor paused mid-sentence to swallow the lump in his throat. Not even when the final medal was placed in his hand. Polished. Heavy. Almost reluctant to shine under the soft dome light above. Frank didn't look at the crowd. He looked down at the wooden case, then up at the faces in front of him. Some were the same ones who once walked past him at the gas station. Some had whispered. Some had watched. And yet, here they were, not cheering, not clapping, just standing, with their hats off and their eyes low. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't unfold any speech. I didn't call them because I wanted attention, he said, voice steady. I just needed to remember that once upon a time, nobody got left behind. And then he nodded, slow, firm, final. As the band stopped tuning and the breeze caught the edge of the flag above the altar, every man in uniform raised a silent salute. And outside, just beneath the town's main flagpole, someone had quietly staked a second banner into the soil. It read, "Some heroes stand, even when we forget to look." If that moved something in you, type honor in the comments, because remembering is the least we can do. And if you're someone who still believes in quiet strength, silent dignity, and the kind of courage that never asks for recognition, this channel was made for you. Stick around. Some stories, like some men, never fade.